Hi, I'm Bobby Halton, and welcome to Fire Engineering's Google Hangout, brought to you by our good friends at Honeywell. Hey, if you're not familiar with what Honeywell does, they got a total array of products, everything from Morning Pride bunker gear, fire detection systems, the Ranger boots. Go to honeywell.com, click on their fire products, and you'll just be amazed at the stuff, besides all the great detection equipment that Honeywell builds and designs and all the great enunciator panels and everything else they do. They also do a lot of tremendous education, 3D firefighting down there in Texas. They got a great facility. So you get a chance to look at our good friends from Honeywell who are helping bring this broadcast to you. And thanks to our friend Jeff Morris for his great support of the fire service. We'll talk more about Jeff in a little bit later on in the broadcast. But we're here in Washington, D.C., and we're at the Congressional Fire Service's annual gathering where we hold a dinner to try to cajole our friends in Washington to give us money, which is we come with our hands out, they slap our hands, and we go back home. So, but they do it in a very nice way. They disappoint us at a rate to which we've become accustomed. So it's kind of an annual gathering, and so we thought we'd take this opportunity because an amazing, not an amazing thing, but I think a landmark thing happened, and I think that the Prince George County Fire Department ought to be very proud of it, and so we asked the chief to come and talk about it, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I'd like to introduce everything. I got Chief Bashoor, Marc Bashoor. He's the boss out in Prince George County, and here with us while they're having a trying week with water rescues and flooding, and he's kind enough to give us some of his time this afternoon to talk about what they're doing in regards to tactics and firefighting in lieu of all the studies from NIST in particular with basement fires, but in other aspects of structural firefighting as well. We've got the one and only Dan Madrzykowski, who to the fire service hardly needs an introduction anymore today, but he's the lead researcher for the National Institute of Standards and Technology's Fire Behavior and Buildings Division.
Call it what you want.
Whatever you want. He's a
firefighting technology. That's what I lead.
What was Fred Flintstone? Wasn't he the Grand Poobah of the Royal Order of Buffalo?
Yeah. So there you go.
Dan is the Grand Poobah of the Royal. And remote with us is Mike Dugan, retired captain FDNY, and the editor for us of our Fire Focuses. And Mike does a lot of research into fire behavior and fire tactics, and acutely aware of the 57th Street fire and what occurred there, and looked at it. And I know Michael have some probing questions for the chief. And New York City just recently changed its policy, much in line with what you just did, Mark. So really an interesting time to be in the fire service. A great time to be in the fire service. And it's always bothered me, Mark, when people talk about the fire service. One of the comments you always hear is people say, oh, 100 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. But nothing could be further from the truth. If you look at our gear, our tactics, even socially how we respond, we're one of the most innovative, creative, responsive groups of people I've ever seen, and evidenced in no small part by what we're doing now with NIST and the good folks at UL.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I think sometimes we just drag ourselves along to drag ourselves along. I mean, the reality is we are making significant improvements every day. And if we can get departments across the country to understand that what they just see as science is indeed more than just science, it is going to be their reality, whether they know it or not. It's here, it's coming, and the flow path issues that Dan's going to talk about, I mean, those are things that are going to save people's lives. And they're going to continue to drag along, talking about 100 years of tradition unimpeded by progress. But you're absolutely right. It seems like we always talk about it, but we are making leaps and bounds progress.
And we have. I mean, I think since our inception, we've kept pace. We've kept pace with the learning curve of society. Mm-hmm. I don't think we've been any faster or any slower. It's just self-deprecating when people say that, and a lot of times out of frustration and whatnot, but I completely discount it.
And when you interact with the fire service, me as an outsider, this idea that they're just dumb old firemen that's just a facade that they want to keep up. Most of them are working, design engineers. They're all designing a new nozzle, a new hook, some sort of wind control device. I mean, all those new tools that FDNY embraced were basically developed in-house at a fire station somewhere or at their R&D department because they had a bad fire where their friend got hurt. And they said, there's got to be a better way. We can do this. And they just needed somebody to come with measurement. That's what NIST brings. We're one of America's measurement labs to understand what the fire was really doing and then be able to show them the data to say, yeah, what you're perceiving is absolutely correct. You're knocking the fire down faster, or you're making it cooler, or you're smothering the fire. and then that's sort of the little bit of lift that they needed just to get over that hurdle and say, you know what, we're going to change. You know, we can understand this better now. So the idea that that the fire service is just full of dumb old firemen is just, you know, not at all true.
Yeah, and it's not serving us well. And you know, we talk about. I asked Mike to join us today because in the education world where Mike is, you know, Mike's out training and teaching every weekend and all across the world. You see it, right, Mike? I mean, you see it taking hold, and little by little, but it's really a groundswell. So some folks have referred to it as a renaissance, and it may very well be.
Well, I think it has to take hold, because what Dan is doing and what we're finding in the fire service is that we're seeing fires where people are saying, I've never seen this happen before. I've never seen the fire do this before. It's never been like that before. It's because of what's burning, the materials that are burning, and what's going on in the structures with the flow paths and everything, energy efficient windows, tighter buildings, all of these things come into play, and firefighters are getting hurt. So now we have to adapt how we do business to make sure that we understand how we are going to impact the building, because we don't have the same time frame that we used to have when you and I started in the fire service, Bobby, because the fuel load has changed.
Right, and then it's been changing since the 50s, but the total takeover by polymer-based products is really the 70s and 80s.
80s.
Yeah, to where it's, you know, I grew up in kind of a transitional phase, if you will, between legacy furniture and but slowly it all got, you know, donated to Goodwill or destroyed or wore out and replaced by, you know, modern foam mattresses and the like. And I think it isn't good or bad, or it just is what it is. You know, Dan often says that it's just what is. So I think it's a great place to be right now. Chief, if you wouldn't mind sharing with the folks out there who may or may not know, tell us a little bit about what happened at the 57th Street fire, kind of an overview and what went down that day.
Yeah, 57th Avenue, it was February 24th, 2012. I term it a turning point for the Prince George's County Fire and EMS Department. We, in an area that's pretty urbanized, mostly in that particular area, mostly single-family homes. It's a hilly area with some swamp down below, but not too far from the University of Maryland. That night was cool, very, very windy. We were under a red flag warning from the National Weather Service, and the first 911 reports reported fire coming from a house down the street. The 911 folks received multiple 911 calls for fire coming from a house. They also received multiple reports on the 911 side that said the house is vacant. That information never got transmitted to the firefighters, which was one of the keys into those folks going in the house. As they pulled up, you know, we have a helmet cam that we used in the safety investigation, a helmet cam that shows as they pulled up. There literally was near zero visibility in the front yard with horizontal smoke blowing across the front of the street. They pulled past the house. They were able to pull past the house or as far as they could and stretched to the front door. There was a car in the driveway, a tagged car. It gave every appearance of being an occupied home. The first crew from Bladensburg was followed very quickly with a crew from, the first crew from Riverdale was followed very closely with a crew from Bladensburg.
And just so folks know, the chief supervises multiple departments.
Yeah, 37 corporations that make up the Prince George County Fire and EMS. So that's 2 of those 37. They pulled up together, the engine and the truck, pretty close, and the 2 inside crew from the truck and the engine crew got to the front porch with the horizontal wind blowing at their face. They worked together to get that line in place, and the truck crew forced entry, and in a matter of 2 minutes, this whole thing changed. And when I mean 2 minutes, I mean from the time they pulled up and began to stretch the line to the time one of the firefighters lay unconscious and unresponsive in the house, no less than 2 minutes. And I tell people all the time, it's the first 2 minutes of every incident that make or break that incident. And in this case, it proved it out. There were some problems for the first group of people going in. The first two of that truck crew, they forced the door, and the door was a left swinging door, which normally would swing in against a wall. Well, in this case, it was swinging into the opening of the living room, and the wall was on the right. Mm. The basement entrance was over this way, behind the door. Somehow, the truck guys got in ahead of the hose line in literally seconds, literally a matter of seconds. When they opened that door, they created the flow path, along with the wind-driven fire. They created that flow path that began shooting that hot air and gases up the steps, and that immediately shut that door because those two truck guys went in ahead of the hose line. The hose line had not made it in. So those two guys went in, door slammed shut on them, they couldn't open it. Within literally, again, seconds, they laid on that floor with all the wrath that was coming up the basement now down on top of them. One was skinny and one was not so skinny. The skinny fellow was able to jump out a window. The other tried to jump out but couldn't. So by the time they got back to the second guy, he was unconscious, unresponsive. The one that jumped out first was able to push the door open, which had the body laying behind it. He was able to pull around with his hook and a foot and pull him out. By the time, again, by then he was unconscious, unresponsive. Both of those firefighters and 5 others were admitted to the burn unit that night. The 2 involved in the most serious burns the first one only spent 3 days, and he had some airway issues, but they were minor. But it was Kevin O'Toole was the one that spent 6 months in the burn unit and rehab, and to this day has not returned to volunteering yet. He's still going through rehab, still has a lot of issues, and some of the difficult things for us out of the fire, other than obviously the injuries. The other 5 were people were that engine crew and other people that were standing out front waiting to go in with all of that heat being driven at them. They got burned. Some of the difficulties.
So they were exterior, Chief.
Yeah, the other 5 injuries were all exterior. And
do you have any idea how far they were from the?
On the front porch.
On the front porch.
Yeah. And it was literally seconds. When you listen to some of the videos and the things that are out there on YouTube, and they tell a story that sounds like it went on for half an hour. But literally, from the time they began to pull the line to the time this happened was 2 minutes.
Well, that's a lot of the problems when we're doing learning, and why I'm really grateful that you're willing to come and share the story today. When we break down a fire in the classroom, or we do a fire review, or even a report, we put it in a very linear, structured format. As you said, makes it seem like, well, they were there for 5 or 10 minutes. They were there for seconds.
Yeah, and the house. Not only was the house actually vacant, it was also condemned by our environmental resource folks. That had never been relayed to us. So we were actually closer to a real catastrophe than anybody realizes. When we looked at the foundation of the house later, the rear ground behind the house had slipped away. The foundation was actually cracked. We were just moments away from a catastrophe. It was bad enough as it was. Fortunately, we didn't lose anybody, but we were very, very close.
Well, the Chief is going to continue to break this story down and talk about what Prince George County did after that in their after-action review and subsequent. Dan's going to break down the science. Mike's going to break down the teaching part. But remember, you can send us any question you want at FEChat, hashtag FEChat, hashtag, am I getting that right, Nick? FEtalk. Good, I'm getting corrected by the guy in my ear. So, hashtag FEtalk. Thank you, Mr. Producer. Hashtag FEtalk, and any question you have for the Chief about lessons learned, or any questions you may have about what went down, this is the time to ask them. So this is how we learn. So we know there's thousands of you out there watching right now, and we need to learn from the experience of others, but especially from people who evaluated that experience, took the lessons learned and took proactive steps to build a stronger, better fire department going into the future, and a more effective and efficient fire department going into the future. And Chief Bashoor has been very clear here. A couple of things right off the top: vacant structure, not clearly communicated. That's going to happen.
Right.
It's going to happen. A car in the driveway. If there's a car in the driveway with active tags, you've got to assume that car goes with that house.
Yeah, there was every appearance that it was an occupied house.
Yeah,
and so, nobody faults them.
Right, and so often we want to find where someone made a mistake. Well, if they had done this or if they had done that. Well, they were doing what was reasonably expected, what's the normal, it was the normal interaction these firefighters doing what we would normally do at a fire with those conditions apparent. So there's no stones throwing here. This is, there with the grace of God go the three of us.
Right.
If we rolled up on those two engines, basically. Given our understanding at that point in time, Dan will break it down so we get a little more understanding about cues we can look for to help us better evaluate. So O'Toole ends up 6 months in the hospital, 4 other firefighters with burns, some fairly significant, and you're left with this question what to do. So what was the next steps as far as Prince George was concerned?
Yeah, pretty quickly, we put together both an internal and external safety investigation team, which we asked NIST and ATF, along with several area fire chiefs, to be a part of. We had one representative from the volunteer components of Prince George's County, one representative from the union, one representative from the Fire Investigations Unit, and then all the external people, so that not only were all of the stakeholders internally part of the solution, but we had the external experts, what I now call experts. I used to call them, what do you call us, old firefighters? I used to call them old scientists or something. But the experts we bring in, and it was that group that first I gave them a 6-month time frame. I said, you know what, I don't want this to take a year and a half. I don't want it to be something that a year from now the Washington Post is calling, going, okay, where's the damn report? And
that's right, because you live in the bubble.
Absolutely. And so I got to be honest, we missed that target by 8 months, and that's okay, because as it got close to 6 months, they came to me and said, Chief, we're not ready. We can give you a report right now, but it won't be what it needs to be. And I said, well, I need it to be as accurate as it needs to be, and I need you all. They met and met and met. I only met with them maybe twice during the entire process. It was meant to be me completely hands-off and the department completely hands-off, except for those representatives there.
Good.
In the end, they came up with a great report that's got 46 recommendations broken down into red, yellows, and greens. Reds being life-threatening, need to get done right away. Yellows, not so. Greens are still critical issues, but likely to take a long time or cost a lot of money. So we are in the process now. We've got about half of the entire 46 done.
How many of the reds?
And implemented. Most of the reds. I don't have the numbers with me here, but most of the reds are done. And that's clearly that was our focus. We took the reds first. There are a couple in the reds that when the safety investigation team came up with them, they didn't have a clear enough picture on what it was going to cost to do that. Well, some of those had to go down to that green area because they're just going to cost a lot of money. And while everybody thinks we have a lot of money, we do, but it's all encumbered in something else. Right. It's not like it's a pot just sitting around to pull out.
Right. It's like a rancher. They've got a lot of land, but no
right.
cash.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the last piece of this, where we are today, is put together a separate implementation group. People that weren't on the safety investigation team. It's a safety recommendation implementation task force. Say it 10 times fast. That task force has been charged with the responsibility to come up with whatever orders have to be related to them, to identify sources of funding, to identify whatever needs to be done to implement the recommendation. So they're the ones that are really taking the meat now and building our future.
Okay, before we get the chief to speak about the recommendations, Dan, can you break down for us, And we've got a question holding, but can you tell me what the question is? I'll see if it fits. Good. Good. We'll get to that with the chief. That'll be when the chief talks about his recommendation. That's the perfect. He's asking about door control and positive pressure and some of the other stuff. So we'll get. Dan, before we go any further, because the chief's painted a great picture.
Sure.
What was going on scientifically that night? What were these firefighters facing?
Well, basically, you have a fire in a relatively small box. In the basement of the box is divided in half horizontally. And by the time the fire department had gotten there, the door and the window on the rear were out. That's the upwind side, the high pressure side. And the wind's sort of hitting at an angle. It's not hitting it directly. And then there was a window out on the B side, on the B exposure. And as I understand from what some of the firefighters wrote down in their statements, you know, smoke in the street, in the front yard, could hardly see. Instead, in many cases, instead of waiting to get to the front porch to mask up, they were masking up in the street. That's a big clue. You know, not that they were taught to recognize that clue previously, but you know, something's different about this fire. There were a number of firefighters that indicated that they saw a flame coming out of that window on the B side that was the biggest flame they'd ever seen in their life. 8, 10 feet tall, just, you know, really focused out of the small 30-inch window or so. You know, they couldn't walk between the B exposure because of the intensity of this flame.
It sounds so much like Sean Flynn's description of the Worcester fire, where, you know, people kept seeing things they'd never seen before.
Yeah.
They couldn't close the doors because the fire was so powerful. You were men trapped behind the door because the fire was so powerful. Couldn't open the door. I mean, and everybody kept saying, "I've never seen this before."
Yeah. So the high pressure side of the house is in the rear, and the low pressure side, the downwind side, is in the front. And of course, by the training at the time, they forced open the front door.
Sure.
So what they did was they opened a vent to the low pressure side. So high pressure always flows to low pressure, and that's what started that flow. So
now you got a unidirectional flow path, and you're going in the exhaust.
You're going in the wrong way. And some folks in New York City sometimes refer to it as going down that hallway, going down the barrel of the shotgun. You're just waiting for the window to break or waiting for the door to be open to you know, increase that flow under those kind of conditions. Well, for them, it was unleashed, and in a way, the fact that the door blew closed, I know it sounds crazy, it helped them, right? Because that took the velocity away.
Right.
They were caught in a very hot area, don't get me wrong. They were not in a good place, but you know, if you were to go buy your wife a new oven nowadays, they'd probably be trying to sell you a convection oven.
Right.
And that electric oven, the only difference between that one and the old school electric oven is it's got a fan in it.
So if that
and it's blowing the hot air around.
That fire would have been ripping up.
Yeah, it would have spread even faster. So it sort of slowed it down. They were in a bad situation, but in a way it helped buy them some time.
It sounds like almost reminiscent of Bryceland, Cherry Hill, Squirrel's
So many,
Nest.
yeah.
I mean,
Diamond Heights. So many of these where the firefighters are operating above the fire. But I mean, keep in mind this can happen on a single-family home, or single-story home, just as well as in Houston. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you don't want to be between where the fire is and where the fire wants to go. So you want to stay on the high-pressure side, the upwind side, especially in a windy night. And the thinner firefighter, as you put it, when he got out, you know, he had some thermal damage to his facepiece, to his regulator. You know, so that's how bad it was getting. You know, things were their gear was starting to fail. It was losing its protective capability as it absorbs heat. There was so much heat there, it couldn't absorb anymore. Hot always flows to cold, right? So high pressure to low pressure, hot to cold. At that point, the coldest thing in that room was the firefighter. So now he's starting to absorb all that energy and get burned
with the rest of the environment. Yeah. Wow.
And so the fact that the door was melting to some degree and coming apart, and the fact that they were able then to force it again and reach around and grab him was truly a great feat on their part and able to save his life. Chief made another call about the structure. When we went in the house afterwards and you looked at the structure, there were several areas in the floor that, even though it was dimensional lumber, at that point it was burning with such intensity that, you know, it was getting, there were opportunities for structural collapse that potentially would have dropped the firefighter right into the fire in the basement. So again,
so if O'Toole and the other firefighter gotten a little further, it may have been even more catastrophic.
Absolutely.
Just fallen into the fire. Wow. Wow. What a perfect. It's the perfect storm. You know. Mike, tactically, anything you want to comment on before we continue?
I think there are a couple of things, Bobby, that I really think are very, very important tactically for the newer members of the fire service to realize. One, if you see something that is unusual, even for the most seasoned veteran, something unusual is a red flag. Tell other people about it, because if a couple of people are seeing unusual fire out a window a couple of feet, unusual smoke patterns, or something else, that's an indication. Anything that's unusual that you see, you have to communicate up the chain of command to the incident commander to make sure that everybody knows about it, because that's one of the things. The other thing that I learned from all the studies and the scientific stuff, and I think the chief alluded to it a little bit, is the guys were on the front porch. If you are on a front porch and there is a ceiling over your head, there's a structure over your head, it's going to radiate back that heat. You are still inside the building. A lot of us didn't realize that. In my day, you were outside the front door, you were outside the building. But if it's going to radiate back that heat, you are still going to get burnt. And I think I remember from reading one of the things that the guys were on the front porch, pulling them out and getting burned on the front porch. So that's something that our members of the fire service have to understand from a teaching perspective, is that is part of being in the structure. Once you cross anything that has a ceiling over your head, any porch, and Dan can back me up on this, you are inside the structure.
And that's a good point, because how often do we stage equipment at the front door on the porch, where technically we're staging the equipment inside the fire now because of the flow path. Especially, if we have a neutral plane and we got a bidirectional flow, it feels really good at that point. But if that fire intensifies as this one did, there goes your equipment, there goes your,
Well, and the other thing is, when you've got hot gases moving out of a doorway like that, moving out of that low pressure vent, they're going anywhere from 10 to 20 miles an hour, and quite literally, they come out of that door and go horizontal for 4, 5, 6 feet before the buoyancy takes over and overcomes the momentum and goes up. So one of the things we did as part of the review of this incident was run our fire dynamic simulator model. Craig Weinshank, a young engineer that works for me, did that. And that really shows it very clearly how those hot gases just extend straight out the doorway. So those guys could have been a couple of feet back from the door, even without the porch roof, and still been in the exhaust flow from the fire.
Because the fire was so intense.
Absolutely. I mean, the momentum, it's just momentum-driven flow. It's really going.
And now, not only you have the door open, you have the 2 windows that have been busted out to try to come out, so they had just
even more heat's coming.
One big flow path coming right out.
Wow. 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 So let's continue. So, Chief, you have the event, the report's done, you're working through the top 3 things. Tell us a little bit about what those things are. What lessons did you learn? What's Prince George going to do differently going forward? And how do you, and let's be very clear, we work in a very dynamic environment, and we can come up with all the new rules, regulations, and whatnot. It doesn't mean we're still not going to be, finding ourselves in similar situations down the road. I mean, we're trying to, learning is a process. It's very few people have, unlike St. Paul on the road to Damascus, have an epiphany. Most of us have to learn kind of gradually. So, and it was a great question about the PPV, if you could get to that, and ventilation tactics. So, what have you done in your organization? What have your men and women decided going forward to do differently?
Well, let's hit that question real quick first, because I think we can. I don't want to say we can get rid of it, but I think we can get rid of that question pretty quickly. And that is that in this particular case, we had 40-mile-an-hour winds blowing from the back of the house to the front. EPV at the front door was doing. No fan's
going to beat that.
No good. So yes, that typically is a tactic we employ once we have the fire under control. We don't employ that until we know the fire's under control, because frankly, that PPV can create a flow path, its own flow path for you if a fire's not under control.
Well, the purpose of the PPV is to create.
Is in fact to do that. One that you're controlling.
So you got to make sure that fire's under control. We would never do it in the beginning of the incident. Door control, absolutely. That is. The truck company is supposed to control that door, and in this particular case, they believed that the engine company was right behind them coming in the door. It was literally that matter of 2 seconds where one made it in, the other didn't, and the door shut. And, So from the recommendations, the 46 recommendations, they were as simple as a unified command and control chart to as complex as the flow path science adaptation. And both of those things are done. We vetted a command and control chart through the department. We had one that was part of a general order that some people used, some people didn't. This company liked theirs, and they wanted to have blue, and they wanted to have red. And I've never seen a command chart put a fire out, number one, and I've never seen a blue or a red one make a difference.
That's outstanding coming from you. I could not say that. But.
So in the end, it was absolutely important, and this is why the command chart's important. When I got there to this scene, the incident commander that was the incident commander from one of those first two companies with the guy who's now in the burn center was still standing as the incident commander. And from the chief's perspective, that should never happen. That individual needs to be removed, not as a disciplinary function, but their psyche, that they need to be removed, and they need to be able to go to the hospital and deal with those people. So at the time that occurred, when we finally made that happen, there was a command board being used, but there was no command chart that anybody recognized that was coming in to take that person's place. There was no ability for them just to step in and take the place without having to have a complete briefing of what does this mean and what does that mean and where is this. So everybody agreed, volunteer, career, union, all of them, that the unified chart, they vetted it. We added some things because this group wanted it, and added some things because this group wanted it. But probably the most important thing we did was on the back of the command chart is a quick Mayday reference for the incident commander, so that when a Mayday is called, they don't have to remember some acronym in their head. They can flip the chart over, and on the back of the chart, it's got check, 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 check. Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you call this? Did you, all of the whole lunar, the whole, everything that goes along with it, everything that you can think of, that group came up with what it meant. We had it produced, and now we're
because recall for an acronym under pressure is extremely difficult.
And with it just being literally a turn of a piece of paper. That's all they've got to do to be able to.
Well, it's almost an interesting psychological deal. If you're the incident commander and you're running a fire and you've got your command sheet there, but then something happens catastrophic and you turn the paper over because now it's a different
game.
Event. Yeah. It's no longer, now it's a battle to save our firefighters' lives.
And so that we don't compromise the incident. Literally, every chart has it on the back. So keep that chart working. Someone else just pull out another chart and flip it over.
Right.
But that was something that didn't happen that night. There was not an effective Mayday call. But then, as difficult as the flow path science, we have now adopted a pilot program. We're in the middle of a pilot program that I see no reason why it's not going to be a permanent policy. That we will do the 360s around all the buildings that we can physically do it. That we will reset fires where we can reset them, meaning to attack from a window or a door as we go along. If it's the right move, that officer has to use.
I like that term, reset. So in other words, you're going to knock the heat release rate down to a point where it's tolerable for entry. So you're resetting the operational point to a start position. It's a no-go. We're going to hit it enough to reset it to a go.
Absolutely. And
terminology.
We're giving them that latitude. The company officers have to make that risk-benefit analysis when they're there. They have to tell us whether there's a basement as part of their 360, whether it's an outside access, and as they come back around to the front, they tell their crew whether they're going in the basement, they're going in the front, they're going to reset, whatever they're going to do. The crews, it's not a popular policy by any means. Everybody thinks you're a wuss. You put the acronym in there. I'll just leave it at that. Put the acronym in there, and the facts are, it's going to save somebody's life, and now we know it. And I said before when Dan, he likes the line before 57th Avenue, flow paths was just science. after 57th Avenue, it is our reality.
It's tactics. Michael can relate to this, but Michael and I both grew up in the same era fighting fire. Leo Stapleton was called a wuss. Leo Stapleton was vilified because Leo Stapleton brought us air packs. Working with you remember that, working with the NASA guys, the real rocket scientists.
Yeah.
And everybody thought he was nuts. We're going to wear this stuff? How are we going to, we can't see, we can't hear, we can't, we'll run out of air, we'll have children with 6 heads. I mean, right? I mean, you name the rumor or the lie, and it was out there about Leo. Alan Brunacini with Incident Command. Get Brunacini down here, he'll throw a book at it. Right? I mean, and now today you wouldn't think about running a fire without a command structure of some kind. So the question now I'm going to throw to Dan, and I'll make a shameless plug, and not just because it's fire engineering, but I don't know, can you see this in the video? This is Dan's Fire Dynamics. It's Dan Madrzykowski, John Cirillo, and Ted Nee. And it's 45 minutes, 35 minutes?
About 45 minutes. Yeah.
45 minutes. It's a simple DVD, and it tells you about fire dynamics. It tells you what is heat flux, what's a flow path, what does it mean to you on the fire ground. And it ends with a great little tactical lesson of a real fire, and they show you where the fire in a ventilation limited and a phase, and it shows you unidirectional and bidirectional flow paths. I don't even know how much it costs. I don't really care. But this is something that every firehouse ought to have, and I don't care if you've been on. I watched it the other day, and I learned things from it, and it helped reinforce things for me. And I've been on since Jesus was a corporal, so everybody should watch it, and every firehouse should have it. And we probably, if you're fighting fire routinely, you should probably review it periodically, just to keep those concepts in your head. So Dan, talking about this fire and basement fires in particular, because this was really a basement fire, what are we looking at today in terms of the fire behavior that we need to be aware of? And then I'll let Mike launch on some of the tactical options that we're kicking around.
I mean, for a basement fire, using the older tactics where you wanted to go from the top down, first off, if it's a wood frame structure, you always have the potential for a collapse. So you're putting those members potentially in harm's way, even though they're going to protect the surge, protect the stair. they're in a bad spot. If those tactics came up originally, go back years ago, think of what people's basements look like, more like cellars, right? They really didn't have big windows, if any windows at all.
Oh yeah,
right?
Those little casement pull-ups.
Yeah, people were using them to store vegetables. That was the cool part of the house in the summer. All sorts of things.
Was down there.
Yeah. But nowadays, we have walkout basements. We have basements with fire emergency escape windows, bigger windows, and those can introduce a change in ventilation. So now instead of a fire that can't breathe down the steps that you're going to tough it out and go on your belly and get down there and go get it, now you have a fire that literally can kill you if the window breaks. And I mean, so that's the risk you're taking. Whether or not that window is vented intentionally or accidentally by the fire, or however that window fails, now that can cause that fire in the basement to generate a flashover condition. Anybody that's in the basement is not going to survive. And people that are at the top of the stairs, they're in that chimney, right? They're in the flow path of hot gases, just like Cherry Road occurred, 15 to 20 miles an hour, and you can't react fast enough. It hammers your gear with so much heat that if it keeps flowing over you in that hot convective flow and you can't get out of the flow, or somebody doesn't cool you down with a hose line.
Well, Chief said it was a matter of seconds, and firefighter O'Toole spent 6 months in the burn unit. That's not a small burn. That's
absolutely not.
Life-altering.
And this one was a basement fire on steroids because it was also a wind-driven fire, which again reduces the safe time because it increases the heat transfer rate. It makes the convective heat transfer all that much more efficient. We have mechanical energy from the wind trying to add energy to the fire environment. And then the additional oxygen that it mixes with the fuel-rich environment adds additional chemical energy.
Like the
so
old
you're just pumping extra energy. And then, as people saw in the video from the Boston fire, all that additional energy then, in many cases, can't vent out the downwind side. The holes aren't big enough. There's just so much pressure building that then you see the flames blast upwind or backdraft, if you want, and that's what's going on. It's got to equalize the pressure. And then it builds again, and then it equalizes again.
Wow.
So same kind of thing here at 57th Avenue.
I'll let Mark and Mike talk about what should we do tactically now when we're faced with basements? Mike, you want to start off and
Well, I think what Mark said about resetting the fire, I've got a lot of friends who have been put out of the job or injured going downstairs into a basement in great engine companies, okay? Because there are a couple of things. First off, what's in basements in the modern home, okay? I think about when I was a little kid, the basement of my parents' house, we used to be able to roller skate in it on wet days because there was nothing stored down there. You know, large Irish Catholic family, there was the extra refrigerator and the extra freezer and my old man's workbench. That was it. There was nothing else down there. We had a ping pong table and all that other stuff. Now, because people aren't buying bigger houses and the cost of building houses and everything, they're moving a bunch of stuff down into their basements. They're inhabiting what was uninhabitable space. So the fuel load down there is increased dramatically. So resetting, as Mark said, resetting the basement fire, putting water in from the outside before you go down that stairs is not a bad move. Also, as Dan said, the first floor, you got to know what the building is built out of, what the materials are. If they're unprotected wood flooring members, whether they're new or dimensional lumber, you are still going to be putting a company of 3 or 4 or 5 individuals on that floor, impacting them and putting that load on there, okay? The firemen banging back and forth on that load is going to just be a huge, huge issue for us. So we have to think about that impact load, and maybe we have to make an attack from the outside. And
that being said, Mark, have you guys talked about piercing nozzles or Bresnan distributors? I mean, I remember we used to have cellar nozzles and we had Bresnan distributors.
Yeah, we used to carry them on everything. But
sure.
Very few do anymore. But one thing I want to say, with the resetting, we're using the resetting now not only for basement fires, for all fires.
Yeah, no.
And we're also trying to get people to stop thinking that they have to go down the stairs. Yeah, okay, if that's the only way and you got to get to the stairs and someone can't get a line in a small window in the basement to try to reset it, then you got to do what you got to do, but you got to do it as safely as you can. So we're trying to actually come from the outside in at the basement level if that's what it takes. Dan's science, when we all came up, we said, oh my God, you're going to push the fire up the steps and you're going to kill everybody upstairs. Well, the science and the thermal couplings that were put into the houses that were done with the testing proved that wrong. We were wrong. We were taught wrong, and we've been teaching our people wrong. So what we have decided is that we're not going to allow future generations of our recruits be taught that way. They're going to, we still have books we got to follow, but they're going to be taught the science so that they understand what both resetting and what the flow path issues of today mean to them.
And cooling is cooling.
Cooling is good.
Cooling is a good thing.
Yeah, in the end, if you put water on the fire, it's going to go out.
Right, and I think there's a place for, and we got a bunch of questions holding. We'll get to those next, but I think there's a place to look at cellar nozzles. It's time to look at Bresnan distributors again, and cool the fire down, especially if it's a below-grade fire, if you need to work above it. Mm-hmm. And you could even utilize it if you had a first-floor fire that was so well involved, if you came from above, drop a Bresnan down or use a cellar pipe, cool the fire.
Absolutely. And another thing to build on the resetting concept has to do with ventilation. We haven't talked much about ventilation, and nobody's saying don't vent. It's a coordinated fire attack. You want to coordinate the ventilation with the suppression. And part of that resetting, what that helps you do is reduce the heat release rate of the fire, such that now if you take a window or cut a 4x4 hole in the roof, it's going to do some good. If you have a high-pressure, fuel-rich environment that just needs more oxygen to burn, you're never going to get ahead of it just by ventilating alone, right? So you've got to reset the fire a little bit, then ventilate, then get the hot gases out.
And Mike and the chief can back me up on this too. It's all the naysayers out there who are using derogatory terms or questioning what we're doing. Pick up Tommy Brennan's Random Thoughts book, and column after column of a man who fought 17,000 fires during the 70s talks about one thing: the synchronization of ventilation with fire attack. That was his most. He considered that the most important aspect to training in the fire service. The single most important aspect.
It is very important.
And it's reiterated in column after column after column over a career that spanned 35 years. And so anybody who's saying it's new cowards or people who don't know what they're talking about, I challenge you, pick up Emmanuel Fried, pick up O'Hagan, pick up Brennan. You can pick up anybody who was writing 30, 40 years ago, and they were saying exactly the same things. We're just rediscovering the importance of wind direction and controlling the door. I'll get a couple of questions. Mike, if you got something to say, go ahead.
I just think you're 100% right, Bobby, and all we're doing is just doing it differently. Okay, we're using the outside nozzle. We used to use tower ladders. We're using the we used to use the deck gun on commercial fires. Give it a knockdown before you go in there. Okay, we did it all the time. Okay, and we did it on commercial fires with the heavy fire load. We would attack from outside the structure on the sidewalk and then start moving in. Okay, but now we're just doing it with different terminology and everything else. So I think we've been doing it since I started.
We used to call it darkening down the fire
Sure.
or giving it a dash, and no one called us cowards back then. And you know, if the guys who are doing that aren't going to a lot of fires, because getting burned is no fun. You know. Go ahead. We got a question, Nick? Yeah. You got a question for me? We did that one. Go ahead, guys. That's a perfect question for the chief. Chief, this is for Chief Bashoor, obviously. What Bill was it asked? Bill asks, what other things have you implemented to try to help combination departments like some of the ones that you supervise to embrace? You know, how are you doing this almost culturally? How are you getting the men to embrace and understand this? What other examples could you give them?
Well,
and techniques could you give to the guys and gals from combination departments watching now?
we leaned on our experts was the biggest thing we did. We didn't try to do it alone. You know, we always want to do it alone. We always want to think we're the only ones with the answers. And that's just the nature of who we are. One of the things we did, they have a tabletop model ATF has, and NIST is making one for us, that it's a plexiglass tabletop model with put an alcohol tray in the bottom of it and lights a little bit of a fire, and you're able to watch inside this box that's designed like the house, basement, first floor, steps, all that piece. And as they move a panel to simulate opening a window or opening a door or opening a roof, you watch the flow path change. And as you close that door, you watch the flow path change again. Those types of things are what really began to turn people around. Because people, until then, like I said before, it was just science. You know, when you actually get to see it and you actually get to hear that, no, you know, when you see the videos of the thermal couplings where the person tells you, you know what, Chief, if you put that nozzle in the basement, you're going to raise the temperature upstairs to where nobody's going to be survivable. And you look at the thermal couplings with the two different patterns, and I may be wrong on my numbers, but the two different patterns, door closed, hose line goes in the basement, and the change in temperature is only 100 degrees at the top floor if you go in through the basement, as opposed to opening the front door and coming in and going down the basement now on the floor upstairs, the temperature changes 300 degrees.
Oh yeah, we saw that consistently.
Yeah.
You know, so seeing those videos we lean back on the experts to be able to get that out. We did a train the trainer throughout our department. We brought in a group of people who really, at first they didn't all believe in it, but we tried to give them enough information to where they believed in it, and we asked them to go out and deliver that to everybody. You know, I can memo everything. I can put a memo out and make it legislate everything, but in the end, it's got to be, like you said, the buy-in. This, though, is one of those things that is almost a zero tolerance. I can't. It's not one of those things where I'm going to ask permission. It's one of these things that has to be done.
You have to lead.
And the people are still dragging like we talked about in the beginning. But that's okay. We'll get through it, and we'll be a better department in the end.
Well, and some of those initial naysayers, it's like an ex-smoker. If you want to hear, if you want to find somebody who's rabid anti-smoking, find an ex-smoker. Find a. Like, I don't drink anymore, and you find a guy preaching tolerance. I'm terrible. Sit there. So your third glass of wine, Madrzykowski, or your fourth. Not that I'm counting, but I mean, so I think that winning people over with science, with experience, with great demonstrations like the smoke rooms, and that's fantastic stuff. Feed me another question, guys. Okay, that's a great question. So we'll start with Dan. The question is, can you talk about some tactics that Chief Bashoor or Chief Dugan would use on a backdraft? Dan, why don't you explain to everybody what a backdraft is first, and then what people would see, and then you two guys could talk about some tactics that you would utilize if you thought one was imminent, and then we can talk a little bit about the backdraft that our ETF friends witnessed that really was kind of an anomaly.
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, backdrafts are fairly rare events. And it's a situation where you have heat and you have fuel, so you have the fuel gases, so you have, in other words, you have hot smoke stored somewhere, and it needs some more oxygen to really get it going. Or it needs a good ignition source. And when we think about a flashover, we have heated gases that in many cases have cooled a little bit, and the flashover takes a little time to evolve. The fire builds up, it really takes a little while to get going. In the case of a backdraft or a smoke explosion, all the parts are there. It just needs one more thing. It doesn't need two more things. And that's why it goes off very quickly. In fact, in our testing just last week, we had a smoke explosion, wind-driven fire in our test building. And we tried to replicate it. We were doing this out in a purpose-built structure out at in Pennsylvania, Delaware County Emergency Services Training Center.
He called me up like a 6-year-old kid at a birthday party. You won't believe it!
And we tried to replicate it 2 hours later, and the wind had died down just enough. We didn't get the right mixing. The fire was behaving the same way, all the other pieces were the same, but we just couldn't replicate it. So it's still art at that point in time. But the key thing here is, if you're attacking from the burn side as opposed to the unburned side, you're you're getting water to cool those gases off quicker. You're not giving it an opportunity to breathe if you're going in from the unburned side and trying to work your way back down there, so you can minimize that opportunity. We talk about the fires growing. If you roll up and the door is open and you're not ready to go yet, you're not ready to make an attack, it's not a bad thing. Do your yell, see if anybody's inside the door. If not, close the door. Give your folks time to get the lines pulled and all that kind of thing. And cooling as soon as possible. They said, don't put water on smoke back in the day, right? Well, if we consider it's okay to put water on hot fuel, smoke is hot fuel. So absolutely, start cooling.
The late great Andy Fredericks preached that vehemently. Fight the smoke, cool the smoke, and he was spot on back then. Any tactical advice, Michael?
Well, I just think that you have to understand there is a difference, as Dan just pointed out, scientifically between a backdraft. They're very, very rare. They're in a fire that's in an enclosed space that's used up all the oxygen. And the other term is the flashover, or as I refer to it now for the everyday fireman, it's rapid fire development. Whatever the phenomenon is, whether it's wind-driven, whether it's anything else, if you start seeing a change in the fire environment and you have a heavy smoke, you are going to have rapid fire development. And if that's a possibility, if you cannot put water, and a large quantity of water, on that smoke to cool it, take away that thermal level of that smoke, then you have to leave the area. You have to leave the flow path and be out of the flow path and be clear, because otherwise you are going to get yourself in that flow path and you are going to become fuel.
Well, we're right about at 1 hour, so we'll wrap up a little. And Chief, a couple of questions I have for you. If someone wanted to see a list of the recommendations, are they going to be available? Are you going to publish that or post them?
Actually, it was published. The entire report was published.
Can they go to your site, or
they can go to the PGFB PIO website I'm trying to think of the name now. You hit me off.
Sorry,
off
boss.
kilter. That's all right. But they can email me.
Okay.
That's the easiest way, and we can make sure they get a copy if they don't have it. But it was put out, and they can find it on our county website just by searching. But they can email msbashoor at co.pg.md.us.
And we'll link that up. We'll put up something on fire engineering with the link to the chief to the PG website, so folks can get that. Because I would like to, I saw it initially when it came out. It was an initial report, but I never read the final.
Yep.
And so I'd like to see the final, and that would be great. Dan, any closing thoughts? What's anything people should be looking forward to? And then,
well, we're still looking at movement of hose streams and seeing how that impacts ventilation, how that impacts the fire. We're also doing some work with turnout gear at NIST to look at steam penetration. We've just started that work. Again, this idea that if you've got fire crews inside and you're outside and that fire's getting bigger, all of a sudden you've got flames blowing out the window. Gut feeling from some of the things that we've seen on the fire ground. Get some water in there as soon as possible, save their life. I know there's still a big reluctance on the fire ground to do that, thinking that they're going to make it worse for those guys. But you want 1800 degrees or try the steam route. And so we're trying to really see how much steam really moves through the gear and what's really going on with that phenomenon. And radios is a big issue. One of my engineers, Michelle Donnelly, is leading a group with some of our friends from NIST Boulder that work on the signals and the radio frequency work. And they're working with NFPA to develop the first firefighter standard for land-based mobile radios, the fire radios that you use. So that's, again, because it's shown up in NIOSH reports that, hey, these are also a weak link. Yeah.
Right, radios get found. So, any thoughts, Mike, before we wrap up?
I just think that it's the science and the tactics are going to go hand in hand. This is the way of the fire service. And I think to all of the brother and sister firefighters out there, from the chief of the department down to the newest rookie, has to become a student of the game. You have to look at what's out there, what's new, and take it, read it, understand it. I always say to Bobby, and I always talk about reading. Readers are leaders, okay? Go out there and read. Pay attention to what is going on in the fire service and become a student of the game and see what's working right for the fire service. And spend some time being better at what you do. It will pay dividends in the long run.
Well, we will get a link to Chief Bashoor's report so that you can take a look at it from PG County about the 57th Avenue fire. And so folks can read about it. We should learn from experience. I can't recommend strongly enough Dan's CD. Dan and John and Ted did a great job on fire dynamics. I don't care if you've got 25 years on or 25 days, that there's lessons to learn and stuff to study on here and to learn more about. Encourage everybody to pick this up. I'd like to thank the chief and invite the chief. If you want to come out to FDIC and talk about this fire next year, we'd love to have you. I know Mike will be teaching. Dan is going to be teaching. We've got an exciting new hands-on training class we're going to be doing with NIST and UL this year, where we're going to be doing an actual live experiment in hands-on training. So if you're coming to FDIC and you want to do something hands-on with the good folks from NIST and the good folks from UL and the good folks from Honeywell are going to be helping us out there too, and many other folks, but the lead agencies there are going to be giving us a hand doing a real experiment in real time and then going back to the convention center and analyzing the data. So mark on your calendar FDIC 2015 if you really want to be able to sit down and learn about how to do a scientific study and see how they're done in real time and participate, and get to get up close and personal with the equipment and the actual people who are doing the science today. Stephen's going to be part of it, and Dan, and I'm sure that Nelson and other folks from the team will be out there, and it'll be a wonderful opportunity. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If we didn't get to your question, we apologize. It's just a really interesting topic. My deepest appreciation to Chief Bashoor and to the folks from Prince George County for sharing their story so openly and honestly and productively. I think that's really a hallmark of true leadership in the fire service, and obviously the Chief has done a remarkable job throughout his entire career being one of those leaders who leads by example, and his deeds speak volumes. So thank you to the Chief, and thank you to Dan for your continued leadership.
And just one thing, you mentioned early on that we're in Washington, D.C. and we're at the Congressional Fire Service Institute, and this all plays a role. CFSI is the one place that's sort of like Switzerland with regard to the politicians, right? They all want to help firefighters. That's a good thing. And the other value that this dinner has and that organization has is they brought the fire service together. Because in many times you had the chiefs or the union or the volunteers or whatever going in different directions and pulling for different things. And it's as a result of them working together through CFSI that they all start demanding something from Washington. And that came out in the terms of the DHS FEMA Assistance to Firefighter grants and the SAFER grants. And it's really those assistance to firefighter grants play a big role when we're talking about science
Absolutely.
and research, because they've created really a great opportunity in the past 5 or 6 years for a lot of different organizations, Underwriters Laboratory, a lot of universities across the country, University of Illinois, University of Maryland, to really generate some great data that now gets integrated. So you're not waiting for NIST, that's going along with its budget and sort of saying, well, we're going to do this year and this next year and this year. Now there are 6 or 7 things happening at once, and because the community is talking and interacting and leveraging resources, it's really turning out great for the fire service, and that's how all this information is really boiling up so fast.
And even as the resident libertarian in the fire service, which I claim proudly, if I can think of no more meaningful or righteous use of federal dollars than research that benefits the entire nation. And that's what federal dollars should be spent on. It should be spent on things that do good for the entire nation, for the safety and protection. That's what the federal government was set up for. So if you talk to your congressmen and senators, tell them, I want funding to the Fire Act grant, and I want the research funding increased, because we need more funding dollars. These are expensive experiments, and if it wasn't for a lot of our great friends, manufacturers and vendors too numerous to mention, a lot of this we wouldn't be able to do without their generosity. We need better funding, and truly, here at CFSI, that's a rallying cry. I mean, this benefits us all. It benefits the entire nation. The safety of the nation is greatly increased. So this will be available on demand at fireengineering.com. I'd like to thank you again for joining with us. We hope you got something out of this. Thank you to all my guests, Michael, Dan, Mark, thank you so much. Everybody, please be careful out there. And this has been Fire Engineering's Google Hangout, brought to you by our good friends at Honeywell. Please go to honeywell.com, take a look at their products, and let Honeywell know you appreciate their support of the fire service. Thank you, and God bless.